Thank you all, and again, I hope you'll find this of interest. I got involved in this issue about 2 years ago, and I helped form the task force. And the primary reason that I did that was I was concerned, and I'm going to talk about this later. I was mostly concerned about lack of information out there and the potential public relations, harm, quite frankly, that could be done to the composting industry. I would say that I can think of no subject where there are more rabbit holes to go down than on the subject of PFAS. It's a very complex subject. It's affecting virtually every human being in America, and likely every human being on the planet. There's debate about the level of that impact. So, so what is PFAS? So PFAS are a class of substances that are very, very persistent in the environment. I think one thing that will help maybe highlight the complexity of the issue is the first presentation that I did on this subject 2 years ago, that number 9,000 was 4,500. And there's data I see where, depending on the exact definition, there may be as much as 15 or 20,000 of these chemicals. Originally, they were started in the 1940s. There are newer versions as well. Something called PFOA and PFOS are two of the most common ones that are studied and that are no longer manufactured in America. Gen X, which coincidentally is made here in North Carolina, is one that's getting a lot of regulatory and environmental attention in recently. And I'm going to skip through this a bit. So the best answer, and where is PFAS found? It is found today almost everywhere. It has been used and continues to be used in a myriad of products. Some of these products improve our lives. Some of these make our lives safer. I think there's effort underway. I think when these were, until relatively, not recently, but in recent decades, the issue of higher levels causing health issues, I think, has become more and more, I think, known about it. But there's literally an infinite number of household products, clothing. It goes on and on and on. It is likely that there's nowhere you're more exposed to PFAS than in your home, than the typical home in America. This is just, and this obviously can be, Isabella can share this with whoever, but this is just a detailed version of the kind of uses. I heard somebody made a great statement to me just about 10 days ago on trying to eliminate PFAS from the marketplace. And I love what they said. It said to me, I don't want PFAS in my food wrapping, but I like the idea of PFAS in my pacemaker because it saves my life. So it's a very, they're very, very broad subject. I want to touch on a couple of, I guess, on terminology, a couple of things we talk a lot about in PFAS. One of the issues of PFAS is that is our ability to test incredibly small amounts. We rarely talk about PFAS when we're not talking in parts per billion or parts per trillion. So we're talking incredibly small quantities, and I just focus on the parts per trillion. That's a pound of the chemical in 500 million tons, or it's 1 second in every, actually to be exact, 31.7 years. So we're dealing quite often with minuscule quantities, and I think understanding the effect versus the concentration, I think, is an important thing as we get to understand PFAS more. Okay, why is this not moving for me? Oh yeah, half-life is something that's talked about, is something that a subject or a term that comes up frequently. One of the big issues with PFAS is the vast majority of the compounds have an incredibly long half-life. They last in the environment for very, 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 very long time. So you can get accumulation. Okay. So PFAS had all these intended uses, and the products I showed in the 3 previous slides. But I think the world has come to realize in the last, maybe mostly in the last less than 20 years, maybe mostly in the last 10, that PFAS has got into the environment. And the next few slides I'm going to show is try to make the point where how ubiquitous it is in the environment. PFAS has been found in polar bears. I'm a big fan of chocolate cake, so this is why I have this one up here. It's been found in just about every food. PFAS has been found in rainwater, both in the US and in Europe. And PFAS, these results here in very, very small quantities. These are levels in background soils in New England. I was not able to find data on background soils in the Southwest. Can't make a judgment on whether or not. It's generally accepted, I think today, that there are low background levels of PFAS, anywhere reasonably close to whether it was human activity. And just jumping back to here is some of the things: food packaging, foundation, lipstick, dust, carpet versus waste materials. You can see the very low levels in rainwater. Landfill leachate is also an area. Obviously, most of our waste goes to landfills. Some of the PFAS gets washed out of the waste and into landfill leachate. Some of this, but there's less of it happening now. But historically, a lot of that leachate went to a wastewater treatment plant, which in turn results in the leachate getting into or increasing the levels in biosolids. I think this is an interesting study from the point of view of how at risk are we on a day-to-day basis. I've heard figures from 95 to 99% of us have some low levels of PFAS in our bodies. What data has shown is that if you live near a factory that's manufacturing PFAS, or you're near a location where it's been used in products in very, very high concentrations, you are likely to have more of this in your body. Now, would like to note that as a result of an agreement with the EPA, there is no manufacturer of PFAS in the United States anymore, but obviously some of these high levels remain. See the bottom statistic there, the average US population, and that's of one particular PFAS compound, PFOA. I'll share some more information further down because that figure actually has improved from years earlier. Actually, here it is, yeah. So interestingly, the figures in the human body for the 2 of the most common ones have come down. So in terms of I think that's a positive that it's moving in the right direction. But it's any one of us. I have not tested myself. I actually, for curiosity, I intend to this year to see how I come out. But I think again, I've heard 95 to 98, 89% of us actually have some very, very low level of one or more PFAS compounds in our body. Yeah. This is a range of common foods that we all probably eat. And there are obviously very low levels, very, very low levels. But again, it conveys, I think, the reality that PFAS is just about everywhere. Yeah. So PFAS in compost. So yes, it is very, very likely, it's quite likely, especially if you're a commercial operation, that there is PFAS or there are PFAS compounds in your compost. Biosolids is really the only feedstock where where extensive testing has been carried out. Less testing has been carried out on, but some has been carried out on food waste compost, and less on yard waste. I think the general thinking out there on food waste is that the biggest contributor to PFAS in food waste is the packaging. And there are some interesting things going on that I think that are improving that, and I'll touch on that in terms of legislative efforts later. So again, it's so the like I said, there is quite a bit of testing out there on biosolids compost, and it's in at very low levels, but it's in there. The most extensive study on food waste and biosolids compost facilities was actually done up in Minnesota. And what they tested there was, they tested what they call, I guess, the contact water. So this might be rainwater that would have washed off the stormwater ponds or added water. And bottom line was very, very low levels of PFAS compounds were found in both the food waste and the yard waste compost. Quite low levels, but again, higher than background levels. Having said that, the vast majority of composts in the country have not been tested. There are 2 or 3 what I would call pretty good reasons for that. One, testing is very expensive, particularly if you are a small composter. It's very, very expensive. And there are still question marks about the accuracy of some of the testing, particularly when you're testing such a complex substrate such as compost. I think it is testing has improved a lot, but there's still question marks. And the cost is quite substantial. I think the second major reason why a lot of compost around the country is not tested is there is no regulatory requirement to do that today. But what we do know is that levels in compost, from the results we have out there, there are multiple times below what you would find in many household products and household dust. Okay. So this is I think, an important pamphlet that the US Compost Council put together, and it's a version of this is something that's in the shape of a business card, the size of a business card, that I think every composter should carry around with them. And these are, the Compost Council supply these free to their members. But it's a nice presentation of a good cross-section of, of contamination. Again, focus on the 2 most commonly discussed ones, PFOA and PFOS. You can see another look at the human blood levels from 1999, 2000 to 2017. The trend has certainly been in the right direction. Okay, so what are the risks to composters? I look at the risks. I'm not a medical expert, so I am not addressing. There's a lot of discussion out on the complex subject of your exposure, if that's a risk. So my focus is more heavily on what's the risk to your business and public relations and that. On the exposure to yourself, there is no evidence whatsoever out there that would suggest that compost is a significant, I guess, source of exposure or avenue of exposure versus your home household dust, clothes you wear, many, many other things. I think public perception, if you're a composter, I think public perception is a concern. I feel that the better job we do of educating the public, the better, because one of the very important things I think to understand is that given that PFAS is just about everywhere, we don't want really the public to totally panic because of very, 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 very low levels. So, the US Compost Council oops, I'm going to, yeah, I'll keep talking about the previous. The US Compost Council has done a lot on preparing, having materials ready for customers, for members that they can share then with, if they get asked, or I think they have a couple of great handouts that help you ask some basic questions if, if you get asked by the public or asked by somebody who wants to buy compost. I'm going to go back one here a moment.
Yeah. Is there any way to get it done today, just in case it's not battery?
Yeah. So I think that, again, the overall, the public perception, the key here is get educated.
Though, like sometimes I'm going to have enough power to jump the battery. Okay.
Again, I think the best way to deal with the public perception
the cheapest one as possible
is get as informed as you possibly can.
Yeah, something at your house, then maybe you could hearing today.
Okay.
Just to make sure
the next area is potential regulations. For the last 2 years, up to the last presidential election, there was a lot of concern about CERCLA, which is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. That under that PFOA and PFOS were going to be designated, and consideration given to a couple of more compounds was going to be given to classified as hazardous. EPA came out with a draft designation earlier this year, but the reality is that the current administration has no intention of doing anything about that. So if you're worried about a regulation or that ain't going to happen. That's everybody. Inside the view, I think, of everybody who's informed is that is dead. And this is got ahead of myself down the briefing. So, however, several states, and I see New Mexico is in there, are considering some type of policy like regulations and that to address PFAS. Most of the regulations, which I think are a great thing, are directed towards removing or reducing the use of PFAS out there in the marketplace. My personal view is if we stop using, if we determine, and I think the experts have determined there are some certainly serious considerations regarding health from these products, then the solution is to stop using them. Now, that can't be done overnight. This is a very complex subject. Most of the state legislation has been around banning or reducing the use of these compounds, with and a lot of them will have exemptions for like essential uses and that. For instance, a very common place they're used is in firefighting foams. And anywhere a lot of firefighting training and that has been done, there are high build-up of these compounds. So I would keep an eye on New Mexico, and I would judge if there are bills there that are focusing on efforts to reduce it. I think supporting those bills, I think, is an important thing to do for soil, for compost, for soil, and quite frankly for the environment. Okay. I'm just going to touch on three states. I just picked these because it's a range. So Georgia is, and I'll discuss in more detail later what passive receivers are. Composters, well, actually, I should touch on it now very briefly. Passive receivers cover anybody who gets waste into their business, gets PFAS in their business. We're mostly talking about waste recycling companies, waste management companies, public water systems, wastewater systems. Inadvertently, they're really the victims of PFAS getting into that. So Georgia is proposing a bill that would protect any passive receiver from being sued or from a regulation in the future. Colorado are doing something fairly interesting. I haven't been able to get a recent update, but they're focusing on, they have a testing program on biosolids. So what they're doing is they're getting wastewater treatment plants and those who manage biosolids, including composting facilities, to test their incoming feedstock. And if the levels are below a certain level, they're telling you nothing more to be done. If they're higher than a certain level, they are telling you that you need to further test upstream and come up with a plan over time to reduce the levels. Maryland, there are bills going through Maryland legislature that are a bit controversial. They're proposing incredibly tight limits on PFOS and PFOA, very, very tight limits, which I think would create a lot of hardship and potentially for customers, especially for wastewater facilities and such. Okay. Just some general points on research. Again, as I said earlier, when it comes to compost, most compost has not been tested at all. A number of states, and that's really what Colorado is, a number of states are implementing or are developing plans or some stage of discussing them to expand testing. To my knowledge today, the vast majority of that testing is focused on biosolids products, biosolids compost, and biosolids. I don't know of any extensive effort yet to test food waste compost, and certainly not yard waste compost. Yeah. Again, and I've talked to a lot of people about the next bullet. There is no credible evidence out there yet that any compost is increasing exposure to PFAS compost in the environment. That kind of stands to reason given the incredibly low levels of PFAS that might be in compost. And obviously compost being high in organic matter tends to bind contaminants up anyway. There are a number of new technologies in the market to remove PFAS. Virtually all of these are focused on drinking water, which I think is kind of the right approach. These municipalities are doing this obviously, but it's very, very, very expensive. These systems can go into the tens of millions of dollars. And I expect more money will be spent on that in the next decade. Obviously drinking water is something you are very, very exposed to. You're ingesting it directly. So it's and rightfully it's always a high concern. And then the federal farm bill, which is always a controversial bill to get passed about every 5 years. The group I'm involved with and others, we push to get some money into the farm bill to do research on a range of aspects of PFAS in soil, PFAS in compost and such. And as of last week, the money is the language is still in the bill. Fingers crossed as to whether it will stay there in the final version. The last one there is a link to one of the universities. There's some interesting research. It's very early stages that certain microbes are actually showing a little promise to break down certain PFAS compounds. Still very, very, very early days. Nothing. We're a long way from being saying all our good compost can break down PFAS. Okay. So what the US Compost Council, obviously we've been very active on this. We formed a task force in the fall of 2022. We hired a legislative expert to kind of guide us through Washington, DC and get us educated on what the EPA are doing. We were able to keep him on for about 1.5 years. We've a national campaign going with state chapters. We're following bills in as many states as we can. And again, the vast majority of these bills we are supporting. Occasionally there's one that we don't. The passive receivers group that I referred to earlier is a large group of people who are basically handling or recycling waste materials and managing water or wastewater. All together, we've become a fairly powerful lobby group, at least powerful enough that we can get a hearing from time to time. But having said that, right now, and it's been going on for a while, there is nothing but chaos in Washington, as I think you all know. So there isn't a whole lot of movement one way or another at the moment. Yeah. The task force has made several trips to advocate for composters over the last 2 years. As I said, we're continuing to track developments in all states. I would urge you to reach out to the council and get your hands on. I think we've got some very good information packages. I think it might help and further answer your questions and build on what I have shared today. This is, and forgive the blurriness, this is the little pocket card, as we call it, that we have made. And again, it's about the size of a business card or thereabouts. I think there's a larger version as well, but it's a great one for anybody who's in the world of composting. I think it's just a good basic one to have, that I think very quickly share some lovely data that explains, you know, I think how ubiquitous PFAS is, and you know where we come in contact with it. Yeah. What should you do? I think number one is try not to buy products with PFAS. I will talk about one there where I think, from what I understand, I don't have exact numbers, but it's an area where I think tremendous progress has been made, and that it is food packaging. You know, fast food restaurants, they have historically some of those wrappers, burger wrappers, lots of other things, had products with, you know, versus compost and soil, crazy high concentrations of PFAS. Very good progress has been made in kind of not using those materials anymore. So that's, I think it'll be helpful if we're all conscious of this, and you know, ask clothing, you know, Gore-Tex clothing, those type of clothing. A lot of those historically have used a lot of PFAS. Do the best you can to stay away from those. Again, repeat what I said earlier, support legislation aimed at reducing or eliminating PFAS, and be informed, and we'll ask you to support, you know, USCC campaigns in this regard. Basically stay in touch with the USCC through their members or through their staff and website. Yeah. And this is the list of the passive receivers group. And as a composter, I'll make one comment about this. Is typically composters are on the opposite side of the fence versus a lot of these groups, you know, the wastewater, the landfill industry and that. But at a higher level, the council decided that we all were on the same side of the fence in this regard. And we're all fighting to make sure the regulations focus on eliminating PFAS upstream, you know, not basically punishing somebody who has PFAS in their product or waste against their will, basically. Okay. So, and this is just a link to the US Compost Council. So, sorry.